Joining me now, Nile Gardner, a former aide to Margaret Thatcher, who now runs a Heritage Foundation Centre named after her, not here, but in Washington, D.C. Nile Gardner, thanks so much for joining us. Lovely to see you. Let's start with 1984 and your reflections looking back on what happened there. The IRA very nearly pulled it off.
Yes, an extraordinary event. And as you showcased earlier, Margaret Thatcher demonstrated tremendous courage and leadership and determination in the face of monstrous evil. And the IRA tried to assassinate not only Margaret Thatcher, but the entire cabinet. And she survived. And she went on, of course, to deliver the Conservative Party conference speech on the same day. Just a few hours later, she refused to leave Brighton. She stayed overnight, actually, at the police college. And she was determined to stand up to terrorism. And this is what Margaret Thatcher was all about. I mean, a lady of tremendous conviction, principle, courage. She would not give in to the forces of evil, and she was determined to stand up to them and to defeat them.
I just wonder, Niall, what you think, and you've looked so closely at her life over the years. I wonder what you think and how you think what happened in Brighton changed her attitude towards her premiership, towards terrorists in particular. I mean, we look at Boris Johnson's brush with COVID and evidence perhaps that it changed his thinking on how to approach coronavirus. How did it change her?
Well, I think, Colin, it made her even more determined to stand up to terrorism and to defeat the IRA. And of course, Margaret Thatcher's leadership was absolutely instrumental in forcing the IRA to the negotiating table. And her view was that you can never appease evil. You have to stand up to evil. And I was actually with Lady Thatcher during the 9/11 attacks. I was working in her private office, and I watched actually as the Twin Towers fell alongside Lady Thatcher. And her immediate instinct and her response was that we have to go after the terrorists, hunt them down, and absolutely destroy them. And that was her immediate instinctive response on 9/11. And she was on the phone very soon afterwards, in the aftermath of the following days, to President Bush and to Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, urging very strong, immediate military action against the Taliban and against al-Qaeda. And that was always her fighting warrior spirit. Margaret Thatcher was a truly great leader. She was interested always in living for the sake of her nation. The IRA tried to take away her life. They've miserably failed. And throughout her life, she stood up to terrorism, and she was determined always to confront evil. And that was her approach, whether confronting the IRA or confronting the monstrous tyranny of the Soviet Empire. Her determination always was to fight for her country and advance bold, strong British leadership in the face of those who sought to tear Britain down.
Fight for her country, Niall. Why is it then, do you think, that her country, or at least parts of her country, parts of the establishment which to a great degree she stood outside of, have been so reluctant to honour her?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, Margaret Thatcher was always an outsider. She came from a very humble background. She was a grocer's daughter. She came from outside of the Conservative Party establishment. And even though she won, 3 general elections in a row, she was despised by a lot of the upper echelons, the elites within her own party. And of course, the Labour Party absolutely hated Margaret Thatcher because Margaret Thatcher emphatically defeated socialism. She stood up to socialist ideology, and she turned Britain from the sick man of Europe into a great economic power once again. She restored Britain's pride on the world stage. She slayed many dragons, Colin, that's for sure. And in the process, of course, she made a lot of enemies. And it's not surprising, today that you still see some very small-minded people who like to sneer at Margaret Thatcher. And the reality is that Margaret Thatcher, alongside Winston Churchill, was the greatest prime minister of the modern era. And she restored the great back into Great Britain. And that's a tremendous record, actually, from a leader who rose from very humble origins. And in fact, I think the British people owe Margaret Thatcher an immense debt of gratitude. So does the entire free world as well. She was a leader who stood up for freedom across the world, and she helped to bring down the might of the Soviet Empire, which had been responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. And Margaret Thatcher, together with Ronald Reagan, brought down the Soviet Empire. And so the entire free world, I think, owes Margaret Thatcher an immense debt. She should be honoured and remembered as a truly great leader who transformed the world.
And yet, Niall, the normal rules that apply to people, the passage of time, soothing wounds, don't seem to apply. It's as if the normal rules of gravity have been suspended for Margaret Thatcher. I mean, I remember reporting from her funeral and standing next to a crowd of people. One man in particular was singing "Maggie, Maggie, Maggie, dead, dead, dead," utterly tasteless. And that was repeated across the piece. And there are still people now, and you say the words Margaret Thatcher to them, and it's like a reflex action. When will it come to an end, if ever?
Well, that's an important point, and I think you're always going to have those who, hate what Margaret Thatcher achieved, because anyone who achieves so much for her country is always going to, attract the animosity of, little-minded individuals who hate their own country. And I think that's the case, actually, with regard to the reaction to Margaret Thatcher. She was also, it has to be said, I think the inspirational force behind Brexit, and her book Statecraft, published in 2002, was the genesis of Brexit. And we're free of the shackles of the European Union today because of Margaret Thatcher's original vision, decades ahead of her time. And of course, people on the left, especially the far left, are always going to resent that. People who constantly try to put their own country down are always going to have bad things to say about Margaret Thatcher. But, I worked for Margaret Thatcher for several years. It was an immense privilege, honour. And I admire everything she did for the British people. She lived every day of her life for the British people. And I was also at the funeral of Lady Thatcher, and I saw the huge crowds on the streets of London, the vast majority of whom gathered to cheer the Iron Lady, actually. There were a few dissenting voices, but the vast majority of people out there were cheering on a truly great Prime Minister who lived every moment of her life for the sake of the British people, for the sake of the British nation. Britain is immensely better off as a result of Margaret Thatcher's leadership, and it's such an honour to have spent time with the great Iron Lady.
Nile Gardner, thanks for your time, Niall. Thanks a lot.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.